Protecting parents from false accusations of child abuse. That is the idea behind a bill that will give parents the right to get a second medical opinion if accused by a doctor of causing serious injury or harm to their child. 11Alive senior investigator Rebecca Lindstrom has spent the past 2 years reporting on this issue and joins us with a look at some legislation and how we got here. But Rebecca, first, you call this series The Help That Harms. Why is that?
These are families who have rushed their child to an emergency room with unexplained injuries only to be blindsided by accusations of abuse. The babies come in with symptoms that range from strange bruises to seizures. After testing is done, doctors find broken bones or bleeding on the brain. I mean, these are serious cases, and no one questions why anyone would raise their own questions and want to investigate to rule out abuse. So it's important to note our series isn't as much about guilt or innocence as it is the roadblocks that Georgia has created to make it really difficult to figure out what is going on. Because as soon as a child abuse pediatrician or a CAP, you'll hear that term come up a lot, alleges abuse, parents say doctors and child welfare, they just stop looking, and they even block the parents' efforts to get more tests done. Parents who know they didn't abuse their child, they know something else must be going on. So when you hear the term help that harms, we're talking about a costly court fight, or we're talking about the separation of a child from their parents and the struggle to get more testing in order to really be able to uncover that truth. And recently I had the opportunity to share part of this series with lawmakers and child advocates at the state capitol. One mother who does now have her child back, or actually her children back, agreed to share a bit of her story with the group.
So just briefly, 2019, my husband and I had twins, Mila and Benjamin. We already had a 19-month-old named Nicholas. We brought him to CHOA. We were falsely accused of child abuse. And they were put into a foreign home for 20 months. And I would have to say there's 5 words. There's probably a lot more, but destructive. It broke up our family dynamic very quickly. Disruptive, ruined what we were trying to build as a family, which was a strong bond, which I will say very proudly never broke and only got stronger. Traumatizing. It made my husband Carlos and I believe we were irrelevant because we didn't have a say in how frequent we could see our children nor care for them. Detrimental. Our children's mental, physical, emotional health deteriorated because they weren't in our care or that of our family. And also fearful. The constant worrying, even to this day, when they were out of our care, of our children in a foreign home, and then the persistent, shifts within the courts and uncertainty of whether we would ever get them back. So they are thriving. They have been home with us for 3 years, and they are really doing amazing. They were not thriving when they were out of our care for 20 months. It took them 20 months to come home. It took another year to close the juvenile case and 5 years to close the criminal case.
What do you feel were the challenges in your case, or the roadblocks that were put up that made this take so long?
So the first one is the juvenile courts. The inability to see and believe any other explanation out of CHOA's abuse claim. They only saw one doctor and said that that was facts. And I would have to say defects as well. Their inability to see and be open-minded that there was an actual medical diagnosis for my child. And then also service providers continuing to side with my husband and I and referencing how well fit we were at parenting. So it got the juvenile judge, as well as DFACS, wanted us to be painted as bad parents, but because they were never painting us as bad parents, they kept punting and just punting and punting. Then I would have to say our criminal arrest. Following the testimony of our medical expert who countered the child abuse claim, we were arrested by the SWAT and fugitive team 10 months after the allegations. So the pending charges allowed the juvenile court to continue the claims that Carlos and I were being unfit. And it also became a barrier for reunification because of the bond conditions, which we had to go back in front of the judge twice just to get modified. And then the biggest one is Carlos and I were never going to admit to the abuse claim. Even though they wanted us to admit to something we did not do, we stand with our morals and our values, and we did not abuse our kids.
As you can see and hear, these allegations can also lead to criminal charges. We have two families that we have followed throughout this series that are going to be going on trial this year. And we had a chance to talk with another family that faced criminal charges, but they were able to get those charges dismissed. And they were able to show the juvenile court and the judge and the DA that there was more going on in this case and get them to listen. They were reunited right before Christmas last year, and here's what they had to say about all of this.
Where's Ridge? There he is!
Casey and Bailey Collins waited 15 months for this moment, the chance to be together as a family without the threat of going to prison.
I don't know if it's sunk in yet, but
I don't think so.
but it's a huge weight lifted.
Last August, the Collins rushed their son Ridge to the ER after he suddenly stopped breathing. A child abuse pediatrician and the Department of Family and Children's Services accused them of violently shaking him, causing a brain bleed. As Ridge went into protective custody, the parents fought to figure out what was really going on. What is his diagnosis?
It's dysfibrinogen anemia.
And that means what?
So it affects bleeding and blood clotting.
But they were only able to get that diagnosis because Ridge's grandparents had custody and could take him to get more testing. It is critical information that led a juvenile court judge and now the district attorney for the Coweta Judicial Circuit to drop the criminal charges and allow Ridge to go home. Some might argue the system worked. It protected Ridge while doctors, child welfare, and the criminal justice system had a chance to sort it all out.
Get 5. Yay!
But this hardly feels like a victory for the Collins, who lost a year with their son and are now drowning in debt from attorney and expert witness fees.
Do we make the credit card payments, or do we celebrate Christmas since we just got him back?
11Alive News Investigates spent more than a year researching the help that harms, interviewing more than a dozen families that took their infant to the hospital with an unexplained injury, only to be the ones accused of causing it.
Because I noticed a lump on her arm.
The series has prompted lawmakers and advocates to raise questions about how the state investigates these kinds of cases. Jennifer Williams is a former foster parent working with the nonprofit You Are the Power.
So this is the letter that we had written and ended up sending it out to all representatives in Georgia.
She is working with other advocates asking lawmakers to require doctors to review all medical records from pregnancy to birth as well as pediatric visits before declaring an injury abuse. And they want parents assigned a family advocate to make sure they know their rights, get timely information about the investigation, and are able to get a second medical opinion if requested.
And I don't think these cases are presented to parents in a way where a second opinion isn't even an option. I mean, it's not like a medical diagnosis, it's an accusation. It's basically being told that you're a criminal by a hospital employee.
The Collins say living with the accusation for months also creates an emotional cost.
Sometimes I'm like, am I good enough to be his mom?
In Hogansville, Rebecca Lindstrom, 11Alive News investigates.
All right, we heard firsthand from some of those people impacted by this, and we've also been hearing, you've been talking about the push for legislation on a state level. What's going on?
Well, before we were able to have that event at the Capitol, we had tried 2 other times. The first time ended up being the National Day of Mourning for Jimmy Carter. The second ended up being a storm. But what we discovered is that every time we sent out the invites to those events, lawmakers were reaching out to DFACS and they were asking, what's going on? What is Help That Harms? What's happening with these families? And that was building the momentum. So the day before we held the actual viewing that we were able to get done at the Capitol, Senator Mark Brass had actually introduced Senate Bill 259. So because of that push and people just asking the questions, lawmakers asking the questions, DFCS did go ahead and make some changes to rules and regulations to kind of go ahead and try to figure out what they could do to bridge some of those gaps. And the first one really was just letting parents know that they would be allowed to get a second medical opinion, that there would no longer be the barriers. They wouldn't have to go to court in order to get permission to get that medical opinion, that would automatically be part of DFCS's policies and procedures, that those parents would know they had access to that second medical opinion. They also created a form that doctors who are making this diagnosis must now sign, saying that they have looked at the casework, the history of what might have happened to that child before they ended up for that particular incident at the emergency room. And they're really hoping that those changes to the rules and regs empower the caseworkers to feel like they can push back. And then with SB 259, the push there is to really kind of give more heft to the change in those rules and regulations, to let the state know that they are serious about what is going on. So they wanted to make those changes, codify them into law. They want doctors to also notify parents of their rights to make sure that not only do you have the option to a second medical opinion, but that these parents, when accused, know that they have a right to that second medical opinion. And it says that that opinion could come from someone out of state. You're not limited to a doctor evaluating that child right there in that particular hospital or here even in Georgia. And that's really important because when you get to some of these specialties, you know, to find someone who might know about a rare blood disorder, you may have to go out of state in order to do that. So the law would allow that as well. I want to play just a few moments of Senator Matt Brass as he was talking to senators, asking for them their support for this bill.
A little over a year ago, I got a call from an old friend, and he was calling me from the hospital that he had been removed from. Just days earlier, his grandchild had gone and had some medical complications to where he couldn't breathe. They took this child to the nearest fire department. From that fire department, they life-flighted the child. The child's name is Ridge. Ridge was life-flighted up to CHOA. The medical professional had deemed that Ridge had been abused. The grandfather was calling me in despair, not knowing what to do, and I told him, "Sir, it's going to be awful. What you and your family are about to go through is going to be a nightmare, but you have to let this process take place." When I told him that, I was thinking the process might take a few days, worst case scenario, maybe a couple weeks. Well, the process played out, and through court and various other means, they had to hire attorneys, they had to hire doctors, other doctors to come in and give second opinions in the court of law, to where the abuse was, it was found there was no abuse. It was all from some complications that Ridge had at birth that did cause that swelling on the brain. And through all that, hundreds of thousands of dollars later, Ridge was able to go home. 15 months later, Ridge was able to go home. For 15 months, a family went through a nightmare situation, family torn apart, a child from 6 weeks old to just over a year old was removed from his family.
And that vote ended up being unanimous. Every senator voted to approve it.
All right, so we heard from some of the parents, we heard from lawmakers. How did this even get on your radar?
There is one family that I have followed for years, just really dealing with the long-term consequences of this kind of decision. Like every time they had a child, it was taken away because they had been sort of ruled guilty by the civil court system. But it really wasn't until another family came forward, and this time a foster parent also came forward saying, I don't know what's going on with this kid, but I don't think that the parents did it. That's when I went to my boss and she said, okay, we've got 1, we've got 2, but are we looking at a trend or are these just anomalies? She said, see if you can find 1 more. And I did that. I ended up finding about 24 families, and not all of them were comfortable talking on camera, but we did get those who did feel comfortable together, and this is what they told us.
Hi, I'm Diana Kramer.
I'm Carolyn Alexander.
I'm Erica.
Most of these people have never met. They come from different backgrounds.
Yeah, I'm a business owner.
I used to work in a restaurant as a server and a manager.
I work for the city of Noonan.
I am an upholsterer.
I'm an electrician.
And I'm an advanced EMT.
Some can't hold a job because of the tragic twist that makes all of their differences disappear. How many of you were accused of abuse after walking through the emergency room doors at Children's Healthcare? Just about everybody.
My son went unresponsive on August 11th of 2023, and he was life flighted to Choa Eggleston.
Bailey Collins and her husband were accused of shaking their baby, causing a brain bleed.
I lost it. I just lost it.
The reasons that brought these parents to Children's Healthcare vary.
I was actually sent to the emergency room by our pediatrician because I noticed a lump on her arm.
In our case, my daughter was 5 months old when we noticed some swelling on her leg.
Our whole situation was weight loss.
But once in the door,
They were immediately taking my 2-week-old daughter's clothes off, checking her for bruises and all of this.
They ran an x-ray and they found a fracture on her leg. And I broke down immediately because I know my daughter has never fallen, had any accidents, anything. And I know I'm an extraordinary mother. They said they would run some tests. It still hasn't crossed my mind that they would ever even try to take her away. I just assumed we would figure it out.
Everyone was whispering about us. I saw one of the nurses tap her friend and say, there they are, there's the parents.
I trust them. I just want to tell them every single detail. They use that to arrest me and say that I'm abused my baby.
And within hours of that accusation, for many of these families,
We were there for no more than 2 hours, and they separated us, questioned us, and then told us that they were taking our son from us, and we were immediately escorted out of the hospital by police. And that was the last time we saw him.
you haven't seen him since. And how long has that been?
3 years.
How many of you knew you were talking with a child abuse pediatrician when they were in the room asking you questions?
When we spoke to the child abuse pediatrician, we didn't know initially she was a CAP. We found this out later once we got our medical records.
I actually didn't find out until we went to court.
Same.
Well, he didn't meet us in person. He called us on the phone.
Well, parents understand and want doctors and defects to protect children. They question how much they truly want to find out what's going on.
I wanted to get more follow-up x-rays. We kept asking and pushing for more follow-up x-rays, and they wouldn't do it anymore.
Did they say why they wouldn't run those tests?
They just said there's nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong.
I came from Romania as an orphan. I was very tiny. Okay, maybe she got my genetics somehow. It was just like a slap to the face, no, we're not going to listen to you because you're wrong.
After I got custody of our grandson, I went to all kinds of doctors. And one of the first places was Emory Genetics. He refused. And he said, it's all right here in the computer. It's 100% abuse. I'm not doing any genetic testing. And I told him I was willing to pay for whatever. And he just flat refused.
Yes, I can attest to that too. We've tried other options like Kaiser, Permanente, and as soon as they see what Choa has put in, it's like they don't even want to talk to you anymore. Their whole tone changes.
If you get a diagnosis, people don't believe it. The court system does not believe it.
Even if these families manage to get custody restored through juvenile court, many still have to fight criminal charges.
I'm facing a lot of charges right now for something I didn't do. I have 18 counts, 2 for each fracture. I'm facing 360 years in prison.
We won our juvenile court hearing, and the court ruled in our favor for my son to be returned home. But since we're out on bond, we cannot be alone with him, so he's still living with my parents.
For 10 months, Tucky Willowrat couldn't live or even talk to her husband.
I'm so lucky that I have friends who can pick me up from the jail and let me go home to them and sleep with them.
The time frame of first bringing your kid into the doctor to having them taken, less than 24 hours, and it takes almost 3 years to have them back home. How is that, a speedy trial? How is that allowable?
Who here has spent more than $25,000 trying to fight to get their kids back?
I even had to, sell everything out of my lawn care business, taking that kind of hit.
We're $100,000 into this. We have loans that we're paying back, and we're barely making it.
These families say they are living proof something needs to change. How many of you feel the primary motivator of the process is to truly protect kids from abuse?
Shame on you, and this is gonna stop.
Take off the blinders when certain things don't line up. Everything is just not, by the book.
I don't think that every case requires you to have to contact the police, because any investigation that DFACS would have done on their own no longer happens, because you're automatically guilty because police are involved.
I believe there should be a second opinion. I think that's what they've done in Illinois and Texas. Especially with our case, me and Terlyn, our doctor was in training. She wasn't a child abuse pediatrician, yet she still tore up our lives.
Someone who's a child abuse pediatrician isn't a geneticist. They're not a pulmonologist. They're not endocrinologists. They're a child abuse pediatrician. Their specialty is abuse. Their specialty is not to look at other medical conditions.
Protect your kids, protect yourself, learn your rights.
You need a lawyer to take your kid to the hospital.
Yeah. All right, so Rebecca, what does Children's Healthcare have to say about all of this?
Yeah, because you heard those parents, and that's got to be really hard to hear. I imagine from Children's, all they want to do is protect these children. And there are certainly plenty of people who would say that's exactly what these child abuse pediatricians are aimed at doing. So they have told us that these doctors go through an additional 3-year fellowship in order to be able to diagnose these potential signs of abuse, and they really stand by those diagnoses. I have not heard any response to the actual changes in rules and regulations or to the proposed law, but I also haven't heard them go into the hearings or testimony and say anything against the ideas that are being presented. Tom Rawlings, he also participated in that Capitol viewing hearing or discussion that we had a few weeks back, and he comes from a really interesting perspective because Tom Rawlings has served as a juvenile court judge. He has served as the director of DFACS. He has served as the head of the Office of the Child Advocate, and he has served as an attorney for families who have been fighting these cases. So he has a really, well-rounded perspective of this issue, and he really appreciates the work that those child abuse pediatricians or CAPS are doing. But we've said, you've seen these cases where there's pushback or there's questions on the diagnosis that they're making. And so during the panel, we just asked him, what do you think about this?
As you know, I've been a judge overseeing these cases. I've been the state child advocate, so I've heard from parents who had these kind of concerns that they weren't getting a fair shake. I have represented parents who were accused of serious child abuse, and of course I've been the head of the agency. And I think what you and I have always discussed about this is that, there is a role there is a need in society for trained professional medical doctors who can say, yes, I am concerned about this child's symptoms. This appears to be consistent with abuse. I think one of the things that Doris kind of pointed out is the problem, is that we all have a tendency to have confirmation bias. And when there is a pronouncement by a doctor that this abuse occurred, I think in the past we've seen the agency tend to say, that's it. And so one of the things I'm really happy about this particular bill, and as well as certainly the policy change, is that the folks in this room are never going to trust the child protective system unless it is perceived as being fair. And that is a critical thing because we want people to trust that system. We want it to be fair. We want to make sure there's due process. And so making sure that if there is a diagnosis, that is simply a medical diagnosis, that you have the opportunity to get a second opinion, not only a paper opinion, but actually to have that child examined by an independent physician. That's very important. And following up on what Doris said, I believe that in indigent cases, the courts are going to have the obligation to pay for those. I've been successful in getting a court order to pay for an independent medical evaluation in a case like this. But I really do think that this is the way to go in the future. Yes, there are children who are severely abused by parents. A lot of times that becomes, unfortunately, obvious when you hear the story versus the symptoms. But we have also seen situations in which the parents said, I truly didn't do anything. I don't know what's going on here. And we have not always given them the due process that they deserve, the access to the resources they deserve, to make sure that we know the truth, not just with the diagnosis, but know the actual truth of what happened or did not happen.
Why do you think the child abuse pediatricians have such an outsized voice in these cases?
Because they're experts. My father was a small town doctor, and I like to think that everybody loved him. I don't know. I mean, the truth in our society, doctors carry great weight. They are well educated. Doctors' opinions are, they're doctors, and so we have to give them that respect that they're due. But at the same time, that should not be the end of our inquiry. Our job in child welfare and child protection, whether you're a judge, an attorney, attorney for defects, or the parent's attorney, child's attorney, is to ensure that there is a thorough and sifting examination of the facts so that you at least come as close to the truth. Don't always get the truth, but come at least close to the truth as possible.
So, Rebecca, after all of this, all these voices we've heard from, what's next?
The bill has passed in the Senate and it is now in the House right now. Lawmakers have until April 4th to vote on it and decide what the outcome is going to be. And then if it does pass, we're going to see what kind of difference it makes, or if we're going to be dependent upon the rules and regulation changes that DFACS has already made. But certainly a lot of people impacted, and a lot of people are going to be watching to see where whatever reforms have been made end up going for these families.
And you've been following this story for what, 2 years now?
2 years.
So we know you will keep going until the very end.
Absolutely.
Rebecca, thank you so much. Thank you for taking us inside this investigation. And we also want to remind all of you that if you have a tip for Rebecca or the 11Alive News Investigates team, you can reach out to them. You can give them a call, 404-873-9111, or email investigates@11alive.com. Thanks for joining us for Inside 11Alive News Investigates, and we'll see you next time.